on the Elijah ministry. I just kind of got stuck on that. I got to Sioux Falls, and I was doing a thing on the lady and tracing her throughout Scripture. It turns out to be the spirit of Jezebel. And then just before I taught last time, 24 hours before, he gave me the answer. It was the Elijah ministry. And before all that, I was doing this thing on prayer. And guess what? It links to the Elijah ministry. I'm like, what?
What's the Elijah ministry?
We live in Ephesians 2:2. It talks about the spirit that is now working in the sons of disobedience. I did a whole tracing thing on that. But that is the spirit of Jezebel. Okay? And
Tell them who Jezebel is.
I'm sorry?
Tell her who Jezebel
I know
is.
who Jezebel is.
Okay, good.
Yeah. She was the most wicked queen ever, married to Ahab at that time, the most wicked king. And very controlling and all that. And then whenever Jezebel emerges, what does God do?
He gives us an Elijah.
He
always be Elijah.
Yeah, he raises up Elijah,
and
right?
She seeks to silence the prophet.
Yes, exactly. Herodias, during the time of John the Baptist, who came in the spirit and the power of Elijah, what did she do? Kill him. Because she was in an illegal marriage. And he wasn't afraid to talk about it. And it's supercharging your prayer. In Matthew, okay, so we have in Matthew, and it's 6:5, and then the other one starts at 6:16. It says this, verse 5, and when you pray, you shall not be like, verse 6, but you, when you pray, go into your room, verse 7, and when you pray, do not use vain repetitions. Now, what do you get from those verses? That
you're supposed to be praying.
Yes.
The assumption is you are praying.
You are praying. Jesus doesn't command us to pray. It's already assumed that we're praying. We're going to look a little closer at that. And then you get down to 6:16. It's all connected. Moreover, when you fast, do not be like the hypocrites. Next verse. But when you fast, anoint your head. Verse 18. And so you do not appear to men to be fasting. Again, what's the assumption? You're fasting. Two things, fasting and prayer. And I think we really need to cultivate those things in our lives. Okay? Is this a spiritual battle? Like I say, I don't look for the incarnation of Jezebel, although that may happen. With the praying and fasting, let's talk about the fasting. On the Day of Atonement, Leviticus 23:26, okay? So Leviticus 23:26, and I didn't really get into the other feasts except for Feast of Trumpets. But anyways, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, also on the 10th day of the 7th month shall be the Day of Atonement. It shall be a holy convocation, or holy rehearsal for you. You shall afflict your souls and make an offering made by fire to the Lord. Okay? So when the Jews read that, to afflict your souls, how did they interpret that?
To fast.
Yes. In fact, in Acts 27:9, it just says, when they were sailing, it became dangerous, and the fast was already over. The fast was a reference to the Day of Atonement. So when they said, afflict your soul, so what God is saying, one of the purposes of fasting is to afflict your soul so that you draw near to God. And affliction can be, in this feel-good age, can be a very good thing. It'll make you depend on God. It'll make you run to God. Okay? And that's fasting, which is why I think that's a really lost art. Okay? Is fasting. Now, let's look at New Testament examples of praying and fasting. First, we have Acts 10:30. Cornelius, okay? He was saying, 4 days ago, I was fasting until this hour, and at the 9th hour, I prayed. Fasting and prayer. And guess what? An angel shows up and answers his prayer. That's a lot of power. Okay? Acts 14:23. Okay, there's another scripture where we see that. And so when they had appointed elders in every church and prayed with fasting, so fasting and prayer, they commended them unto the Lord in whom they believed. So before Paul and his group picked the elders, what did they do? Pray and fast, the leadership of the church. And there's only one thing that stops marital relationships, according to Paul in 1 Corinthians 7:5. There's only one thing that one time when you're not to have marital relationships. Guess when that is?
You're fasting and praying.
Yes. By consent, for a time, you fast and pray, and then he says, come back together so Satan doesn't tempt you. So that's such an important thing that's the only thing that Paul says, okay, you can get together for that and then interrupt it. So that shows you the importance of praying and fasting. Again, a lost art. And I know, I talk to a lot of people and they say, I don't know, all I do is feel bad and I'm going to faint, and that doesn't help me, pray. I think it's something like you work on it and you cultivate, all right? It's not like you got to go on a week fast to start off with. And it could take a lot of shapes and form. Now, let's put them all together and let's go to the big zinger, Matthew. Okay? 17, and this is one near and dear to my heart. 21. Then when Jesus and his disciples were on the Mount of Transfiguration, and they come down, remember the boy that was a lunatic, and his disciples had cast out the demon, and then Jesus had to cast them out. And the funny thing is, in Matthew 10:1, he gave them authority over the unclean spirits, but they still couldn't cast them out. We just assume, well, I'm a Christian, I'm okay. So why couldn't they cast it out when he gave them the authority? Here's what he says. This is not my words, this is his. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, why could we not cast it out? So Jesus said to them, because of your unbelief, for surely I say to you, if you have faith as a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move here, move there, and move, and nothing will be impossible for you. However, this kind does not come out except by prayer and fasting. So we know there's a hierarchy of demons, just like there's a hierarchy of angels. And there's certain kind you just can't pray out. Jesus says you specifically have to fast. So what does that tell me about adding fasting to prayer? If you do it right, does it give it more power?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It increases faith.
I'm sorry?
And it also increases faith.
Yes, increases. It does a lot of things, I think. I think that sometimes in our society, we have all the noise, we have the TV going, we have, whatever, your iPhone going, all that noise. And then when you're fasting, everything comes right down to a very quiet level, and it's just you and God, which is what it needs to be. And then you can tune in, hear what he's saying, and you can make a more clear connection, if that makes any sense. Okay? Now, and this is not meant to be comprehensive. I'm just going to give you a few quick ties. How do you pray? Well, according to Luke, just right here. This is Luke 18, 1 through 8. Okay? And then he spoke a parable to them that men always ought to pray and not lose heart. So if you're losing heart, what does that tell you?
You're not praying enough.
Yeah, exactly. And some translations say that, or you will faint. Okay? So when you start losing your strength, when you start losing your encouragement, when you feel yourself going down, I think that's a signal. First thing we want to do is run to somebody, right? Some other human. And I get that. Because the body of Christ is here, we want that encouragement. But the first thing we should do is run to God. Okay? And talk to him. Now, there was a certain city, there in a certain city was a judge who did not fear God nor regard man. There was a widow in that city, and she came to him saying, get justice for me from my adversaries. And he would not for a while, but afterwards he said within himself, though I do not fear God nor regard men, yet because this widow troubles me, I will avenge her, lest by her continual coming she weary me out. Then the Lord said, hear what the unjust judge said. And shall not God avenge his own elect who cry out to him day and night? Will he delay over them? I tell you, he will avenge them speedily. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth?
Wow.
Okay, so again, that makes that connection of prayer and faith. And so it's kind of a parable of contrast, but when he says he will avenge them speedily, it doesn't mean you get an instantaneous answer to your prayer. In Daniel 9, when when Daniel was praying and fasting, Gabriel came. But in chapter 10, he had to pray and fast for 3 weeks because there was a spiritual battle going on. So the timing's not up to you. You just have to do your part, okay? And when it says he will avenge them speedily, that's taxon, which means once he starts avenging them, it's going to go really fast. Get it? It's going to go really fast when he does avenge them. So, and here's another little tip. And I've always wondered, when I first became a Christian, I read this and I said, how do you do that? It's this. 1 Thessalonians 5:17 through 19. Pray without ceasing. In everything give thanks as part of your prayer. For this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you. Do not quench the Spirit. How do you quench the Spirit? By not praying. Okay? And how do you pray continuously? Don't you got to make a living? Right? Does anybody have any ideas on how you pray continuously? And I've always wondered that until a few years after I was Christian, I figured it out.
Well, the Lord has to be on your heart throughout the whole day.
Yes.
Like at work, like the word's constantly in my heart.
Yes.
Before I speak, before I act, before I do anything.
Excellent. That is exactly the same answer. If he's at the foremost of your mind as you go through your day, just like if you had a friend right by your side and you're in constant communication with them and it's just like he's there, that's the praying without ceasing. Okay? Matthew 7:7. Ask and keep asking, seek and keep seeking, knock and keep knocking, and it will be open to you. So there's a persistence. Now here's the Elijah connection. All right, that I ran across when I was doing this thing on prayer, that I jumped over to the Jezebel spirit and Elijah ministry. It's James 5:16 through 20. Confess your trespasses to one another and pray for one another that you may be healed. The effective, fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much, accomplishes much. Okay, you gotta have an effective, fervent prayer. And guess who he uses as an example?
Elijah.
Elijah. That's where it's like, oh, it all fits now. Elijah was a man with a nature like ours, and we know that. After his greatest victory, Jezebel scared him, and he ran off for a while, okay, because he's like us. And he prayed earnestly that it would not rain, and it did not rain in the land for 3 years and 6 months, and he prayed again in the heavens, and the heavens gave rain, and the earth produced its fruit. There's actually, we don't know how long he withheld the rain except from this and from Luke 4. We don't know in the Old Testament. Isn't it kind of funny for 3.5 years, and that's how long the two witnesses prophesied and withhold the rain? Again, another reason I think Elijah is there, because there's obviously Jezebel there in Revelation 17 and 18 in the whore of Babylon. Okay, now what is one of the main components of the Elijah ministry? And it tells us in the very next verses in James 5:19. And right after he talks about Elijah as the example. Brethren, if anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone turns him back, let him know he turns a sinner from the error of his way, and he will save a soul from death and cover a multitude of sins. Restoration. That's, especially in this time with so many people falling away, that's the Elijah ministry, a ministry of restoration. And it says, if any of you wanders, you know what word that is? Matthew 24:4, Mark 13:5, Luke 21:8. Remember the key word? Deception. It's that same word, misled or deception. If anyone among you is deceived from the truth, exactly what he's warning against. He's saying if that person's deceived, you become an Elijah and you lead him back. And his restoration ministry is explicitly stated in Malachi 4:5 and 6. And in fact, in the last 3 verses of the Old Testament, what 2 people do they mention? Moses and Elijah. That's kind of strange. The 2 witnesses. And what were the 2 characters that showed up on the Mount of Transfiguration?
Moses and
Moses
Elijah.
and Elijah. And what were all the miracles that the 2 witnesses do? What 2 people did them? Moses and Elijah. And to the Jew, what represents the law and the prophets?
Moses
And Elijah. So there's oh man, I don't see how people miss that. But okay. So here's what he says in Malachi, the last 2 verses. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming and the great and dreadful day of the Lord. That is the tribulation. We're just before the tribulation, so I imagine he's here. He's going to be one of the two witnesses, unless he just appears out of nowhere during the tribulation, which he could. I don't know how God's going to do it. I don't know if he was born and then, all of a sudden he had to grow up.
So don't people say, though, I mean, even though I know, but don't people say that was John the Baptist?
He came in the spirit and the power of Elijah. He was a type.
Yes.
And in fact, because it repeats. Remember how prophecies of repeating pattern?
Correct.
And so we see, I think we're going to see today us, the Christian church, and we're taken out. And I think the real Elijah is going to appear, the one that originally appeared. And I think the real Moses is going to appear, which both of them had strange deaths, right? Isn't that funny? Moses, who represents the law, died and God buried him. Just like the law died and God buried it. But then what happened to Elijah, who represents the church?
He was taken away.
He was raptured.
Yeah.
Get it? Okay. Anyways, kind of both things together. And in verse 6, and he, talking about Elijah, would turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the earth with a curse. So there has to be a restoration within the family. And what's the main unit that the enemy will attack?
Family.
Family. So here's my conclusion. I remember I said that whatever's important to the early church is doubly important today. Do you know why?
Because of the repeating patterns.
Repeating patterns, but because Satan's doubled his attacks.
Oh, yeah.
So now we have to do double what the early church did. Okay? And one of the things emphasized, Acts 2:42, apostles' doctrine and fellowship, the breaking of bread, and prayer. So I would say continually pray, be on your guard. It says keep sober and alert, and maybe try a little fasting. Okay? And I can't tell you how long or what to do and all that. That's between you and God. But I'm so sure we're missing an element there that adds power to our prayer. Okay? So,
I have a question.
sure.
I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I've been to prayer meetings that are just so dry of the Holy Spirit. And it's just following the motto of Matthew 6 that has the Lord's Prayer, following all of that, but it's just so dry spiritually. And so I guess my question is, what would you say effectual,
Fervent.
Fervent.
the fervent, effectual prayer of a righteous man? Because sometimes there are very righteous people and very righteous prayer groups and settings, but it's so dry spiritually. I don't know if you guys have experienced that.
Yeah, it's just like when you go into a church and they're Christians, right? But it's so dry. And it's like a Ichabod. You know what Ichabod means, right? The spirit has departed. It's almost like that. And that's not putting anybody down, but the key to it, there's one scripture I keep going back to every single time that has the answer. Deuteronomy 6:5. To love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. That's the key to it. Is to have that passionate, hot, fervent love for Christ. And put him first. Where everything is him and nothing else matters. That's it. Put Christ first and love him with every single thing in your being. And then when you pray to him, oh yeah, it'll be hot and fervent. I mean, it'll be red hot. And that's the way you do it. So you don't necessarily work on prayer. Okay, what do I recite? Or, okay, you work on your relationship, I think. Does that make sense?
That, and if they're quoting and talking about Elijah prayed believing. When he prayed against the gods of Baal, he believed that when he called down fire, he was going to get fire. He believed. And I think that's the biggest thing. So many people go and they pray because that's something they're supposed to do, but they don't really believe that God is going to do what we're asking him to do. Elijah believed.
And you just have to go earlier in the book of James where he talks about if you pray in unbelief, you're tossed to and fro with the wind. And you have to believe. Now, it's not word faith thing.
No.
If you just believe hard enough, or you have
No.
belief in your belief. No. You know what God wants because you're so close to Him, and you pray that with fervency, and you'll get results. Maybe not on your timetable,
And maybe not the results you expected.
but
Wow.
God is the one actually is, if you figure everything out, the one behind you praying that prayer. Okay? He's actually behind it.
Oh, you gotta pray too that your will be done.
Mhm.
Yes.
A lot of people want their will to be done.
Well, in 1 John it says, we know when we pray to Him we have what we ask because we ask what He wants.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right. You can't pray amiss. And the only way you can know that is there's something called the Bible. You have to really get into it and devour it. Okay? And figure out what is God's scheme. It's not just an easy thing to do. And yet, you pray with simple, childlike faith. Just like we're all children, little babies, and we drop into Daddy's lap. Okay? And we just totally depend on Him. All right? We talked about, was it a 50-year cycle or 49? Everybody assumes it's a 50. Why would we say it's a 49-year cycle?
Because 7 times 7 is complete.
Yeah, because in Daniel's last 490 years in prophecy, it was 70 times 7, right?
Right.
Well, that's if the 50th year is the first year of the next cycle, if it was a 49-year cycle. Or they were in Babylon 70 years. Why? Because for 490, they did not keep the Shemitah, the Sabbath rest. So that kind of indicates there is a 49. And like I said, I thought, I'm not going to fool around with that. I got way too much to do. And God showed me where it fit. It's like, and you won't find this. Like I said, I'm sure God's revealing it, but I doubt if you'll find this on the internet. It blew my mind when I did the calculation. I said, you're kidding me. And I had to do it 3 or 4 times, and that's what it is. Okay, next. Let's see here. And I just think, is it 49 or 50 years? You know what I say the answer is? I think it's both. I think there's both a 49-year cycle and a 50, and I'm going to show you how the 49-year cycle. And here's the funny thing is, when you apply the 50-year cycle, you know what date you come out to? 2030. When you apply the 49-year cycle, you know what date you come out to? 2030.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and he has to come back in the year Jubilee. If that's really both calculations, I will show you, you come out to 2030. I know.
How is that possible?
I know. You're going to find out next week. All right. So, it's both. And God gives Himself options. Like, how many tribes are there?
12.
13,
Plus
13.
one.
13. Yes. Because then you can leave out one. He gives Himself options. There's 2 Passovers on the 14th of Nisan on the 15th. Why? So Jesus could eat the Passover meal and then be crucified on Passover, both. Get it? And so that's why. And then also there's 2 70-year periods when they're in Babylon. One starts with the first siege, the other starts with the third siege. And they're both exactly 70 years, and they both have different calculations that they go to and stuff, but they're both exactly that. What is the year Jubilee? And you're going to see some really neat things, okay, that happens. Okay, now there's 3 main things that happen in the year of Jubilee. And when you see the picture and the type that it shows, it's going to blow you away. Now, I'll tell you a funny story. I always have these stories. I think it was 2 summers ago. I was sitting down at my little desk in my office, and I was typing out all this stuff. I put down the 3 things, and I had YouTube going. I always try to, keep the teaching going. And I don't even think this lady was a Christian. She was a financial consultant or something, being interviewed by somebody. And exactly the 3 things that I was talking about, she said, well, here's what's going to happen to this planet because of the way we're going financially. This, and this. Exactly the 3 things I was working on.
Oh.
Exactly the 3 reasons. I mean, God is always doing stuff like that for me. Here's what happens. The Yovel provisions, okay, the year of Jubilee. Okay, first of all, there was financial, liberty. Financial liberty. Now, all debt is forgiven. Now, this is all going to appear in Leviticus 25. You would think it'd be 23. 23, he just has the annual feast. Then you go to 25 to find out about the year Jubilee and other places mixed, throughout. But Leviticus 25 is the Jubilee year chapter. All right. And here's what it is. And if you just go throughout 25, here's what you're going to find is back then when you went into debt, all right, it wasn't so much coinage. You had to do two things to, pay off your debt if you didn't have the money. What were they? One is
indentured servant.
Yeah, you had to become a slave, indentured servant, and then what was the other thing? You had to sell your land. And then they actually let you stay on the land and work it for them, okay? And so that's when it talks about the debt. So the next two things are going to be manifested in financial liberty. Okay, so all debt is forgiven, Leviticus 25. And let's think about this. Let's apply it now to the tribulation period, all right? And so when we go to Revelation 13. Now that should be a familiar chapter, right? What's in 13?
The beast. Or
Yes. Yes, the beast that rises up out of the sea, 7 head, 10 horns, a representative of the Antichrist and of his government. You also have another beast rise up out of the land who had 2 horns like a lamb, but he spoke as a dragon, which was identified as Satan in chapter 12. All right? And here's the trick, verse 16, and the false prophet causes all, both great, small, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark, okay, on their right hands or in their foreheads, that no man might buy or sell, save that he had the mark or the name of the beast and the number of his name. Here's wisdom. Let him who has understanding count the number of the beast, of course, the number of a man, that number is 666. Okay? So, I just heard this recently. Guess what? In the Greek manuscript, it's a 666 word. He said New Testament, but I'm pretty sure he meant just in the book of Revelation. You know what it is?
No.
In the Greek is Mark. Right here.
No way.
Yep. That to receive the mark, the kerygma, which is a form from kerygma, we get the word Charles.
That's my middle name.
Okay, so there's the Antichrist. All right. No.
Or King Charles.
Is there a Charles that just ascended to the throne?
Wait, can you make that connection to Mark and Charles again?
Okay, the word for Mark here in verse, was it 16? The word for Mark is kerygma. That's the Greek.
That's 13, Revelation 13, 16.
13:16, the mark. That's the 666 word in the Greek manuscript in the book of Revelation. And also, kerygma is where we get the word Charles, okay, from. Is there a connection there? Well,
What's kerygma?
it's Mark. That's the Greek word for Mark.
It's the
Okay.
Like a
Greek
mark
word.
on your hand or a mark on the.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I'm just, which actually can be, I looked at it, and it means an engraving or an etching in. And where I worked in the labs, when they make computer chips, they call the lines the traces, they call that an engraving. So that kind of
Right.
links it to a chip. I mean, it goes on and on. All right. So because of that mark, everybody thinks financial freedom, but you know what's going to happen? Everybody's going to be massively in debt to the Antichrist. So there's going to be incredible debt. And it says in Proverbs that the borrower becomes the lender's slave. So we're going to have everybody in massive financial debt to the guy leading the system, the Antichrist. Okay? And so what does the year of Jubilee do when Jesus comes back in that year? All debt's forgiven. That system's wiped away. That's what the Antichrist wants to do, enslave us, okay? Now, the second thing it does is physical liberty, which is this. Because of if you were poor, you would sell yourself as a slave, but you were only a slave until the year of Jubilee. Then you were set free. So it set the slaves free. So when Jesus comes back, because of the financial debt, everybody is their slave. And aren't they already telling us that? You'll own nothing And you're gonna be happy.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna have complete rule over every little aspects of your life, and you're gonna be happy. And people hear that and they say, "Oh, that is so good," you know. And you sit there and you say, "Did you hear that?" But I'm not kidding. I'm not just making that up. I've talked to people, and they think it's the greatest thing ever. Yeah, I wonder if we're in the age of deception.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would think so. And here's the world enslaved. It is Daniel, okay, 11:36. This is talking about the Antichrist. And the king, a reference to the Antichrist, shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god. That's 2 Thessalonians 2, when he walks into the very temple of God, proclaiming himself as being God. And he shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper until the indignation be accomplished. That's the tribulation. Okay? So he's going to do according to his will. He has complete totalitarian rule. All right? Complete. So, let's go to number 3. Okay? There's also a very important thing in it. When you see this, it should make your eyes pop open. Restitution of the land. If you sold land, you actually only rented it out, because in the year of Jubilee, it would go back to you. What has happened to the Jews in this time? Well, Matthew 24:15. When you see the abomination and desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, that's mid-trib, right? Exactly in the middle of the week, Daniel 9:27. Then let those in Judea flee to the mountains. Okay? Let him not turn back to get his cloak. All right. So, right at mid-trib, they flee from the land. All right. Let's correlate that to, let's see, so we got Matthew starting at 24:15, let's say through 17. And then let's correlate that to Revelation 12:13 through 16. Let's see if we can paint a picture here. And this is when John saw a great sign in heaven. It says, and when the dragon saw that he was cast unto the earth, he persecuted the woman who brought forth the child. Who's the woman in that vision? Who was clothed with the sun, moon, and stars at 12?
Israel.
Israel. Based upon whose dream?
Joseph's.
Joseph's dream. He had a dream where he saw those symbols, and it becomes obvious that was Israel. It's not the church. Man, that is such a fabricated thing. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness. All right? Now they're to flee when they see the abomination of desolation to the mountains. Here it says in the vision in Revelation 12 that they are going to flee into the wilderness, into her place where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the face of the serpent. What's times, and half a time?
3.5 years.
Time, years, times, plural, dual plurality, 2 years, and half a time. 1 + 2 + 1/2, 3.5 years. Exactly the time when they flee from the abomination of desolation, Matthew 24:15. Okay? And the serpent cast out of his mouth waters of flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. And the earth helped the woman and opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. So she's fleeing into the wilderness. Now, we're going to go to Hosea 2:14. It says this. Therefore, this is God talking about Israel. Remember, there's 3 relationships. Yeshua with his virgin Gentile bride, right? And then what's Jehovah the Father have?
The Jewish queen.
The divorced wife, Israel. And who has the harlot? Satan. Okay? Now, yeah, the wife did play the harlot, for sure. You have to read Jeremiah for that. And that's when he gave her the certificate of divorce. I think it was Jeremiah 3:8. And what was certificate of divorce? What is divorce translated as in the Septuagint? Certificate of divorce in the Septuagint is certificate of apostasy. The same word as in he can't appear until the great apostasy appears. Isn't it? It all fits together, doesn't it? So he says this. and 2:14, just kind of putting all these together. Therefore, behold, I will allure her, this is God the Father, allure Israel, and bring her into the wilderness, and speak comfortably or kindly to her. So he actually is saying that's where we're going to be reconciled. There's something to be said about the wilderness. If you study the typology, did you know that at Mount Sinai there was a canopy as in a huppah, and that they had like the, I forget what it's called, the wedding vows, which is the law, and then they spent their honeymoon in the wilderness. Does that sound exciting? Hey, honey, let's go out and camp in the wilderness for a few years. And, you know, that wouldn't be too romantic, okay? But that's exactly what God did. The wilderness has a place in a Christian's life. We tend to think that's a bad place. But here, that's where he spent his honeymoon with Israel, and that's where he's going to restore her. You get that noise level down, right? Like sometimes noises come and they interrupt things. Well, this is a case where it all goes down, and you just concentrate on that one thing, okay? Now, we're going to almost there. Then we go to Isaiah 63, 1 through 3. All right? And this is going to tell us where's Israel supposed to go? This is kind of famous in Christianity. Petra.
Jordan.
Who is this that cometh from Eden with dyed garments from Basra? This is that in his glorious apparel, travailing in the greatness of his strength, that speaks in righteousness, mighty to save. Why is your apparel red? And you're like one who treads the grapevine. I am treading the winepress alone, there's none with me. And the blood on Yeshua's garment is the blood of his enemies. But he does it in a place called Basra. You know why? Because that's where Petra is. So in other words, when he comes back, the Jews are not in Israel. They're over there in Petra and Basra. So he goes there first, and the enemies are surrounding the Jews. And guess what? He slaughters them. Then he goes to Har Megiddo, the valley of Megiddo. And he makes a big slaughter there. That's where the rapture of the wicked takes place. Does that make sense? Kind of a little sequence of things that happen. So here's the conclusion. Okay? The slave planet is returned. The whole earth has become a slave planet to the Antichrist. And he returns. Who did he make earth for? Man. And the Antichrist has taken over. Now he's returned it back to the rightful owner that he gave it. Now, more specifically, who did he give the land of Israel to? The Jews. And they were kicked out. And now he's bringing them back. He's restoring them to the land. So you see the three typologies there in the year of Jubilee. Financial debts forgiven. We're under the mark of the beast. Everybody's enslaved. Not we, but people in the tribulation. They need to be freed from that. And that's what the year of Jubilee brings in. They're also slaves. Now the Antichrist owns everything about them. Their body, everything. They're talking about monitoring devices where they can read your thoughts or just if you're intent a certain thing, everything about you is going to be owned.
They'll shut everything down that you own, so you won't be able to drive. You can't use your phone.
Oh.
It's all going to be up to them. You won't be able to take a train.
They just did that to Kanye West.
Oh, yeah, they're just going to do
What
it.
did they do?
It's going to be so complete.
A complete
I'll tell you.
takeover because now we have the technology to do that. You can't do anything. You can't leave your house. You can't do a complete slave. When Jesus comes back in the year of Jubilee, he frees the slaves, and then the planet no longer belongs to humans, okay? It's belonging to the Antichrist, and the Jews are kicked out of the land, which doesn't make the Father happy because he gave it to the Jews and said it would be theirs, and he's going to return them to the land. Now do you see the typology of the year of Jubilee? And I'm going to show you next time what Jesus said about the year of Jubilee in one of his first acts of ministry. And I would tell you this, he must come back in the year of Jubilee. And I have other reasons why, okay? It's got to be the year of Jubilee. That's what I said. If God would appear to me and say, what's your one question, Ed? I would say, when's the year of Jubilee? Okay, which Day of Atonement starts the year of Jubilee? Because that's when it starts. And so once you can figure that one out,
That's his second coming.
yes, his second coming, and actually his first one too.
Okay, I get that part, but I meant his.
Yeah.
Right.
In other words, the kingdom could only be offered or given in the year of Jubilee. Got that? So the first time he came, the offer was given in the year of Jubilee. And the second time when he comes back, 3 days earlier, the Jews have repented, pray for him to come back. It's the transgression, rejection of the Messiah. Once they accept him, guess what's going to happen? He comes back with the kingdom and sets it up. And it's got to be in the year of Jubilee. It's got to be. So, and I'll get that point a little more, honed next time. We're going to talk about the year of Jubilee as the only thing that Missler couldn't figure out. That Chuck Missler could not figure out. I heard him say this just a few weeks on tape. He goes, the year of Jubilee begins on the Day of Atonement and nobody knows why. Now, if I say I know why, some guy from church who I know, I'm not going to mention the name, oh, nobody knows but you and God! Veins start sticking out stuff. It's like, no, I'm not saying that. God has shown a lot of people this, and when you see it, I get a lot of hostility. I don't know if it's my ponytail. Well, that has caused some. But the poll we took, and some people voted against it. But other than that, which I won't mention any names. But anyway, that's it. So as you go through the year of Jubilee, very important. And I got a very good candidate for the year of Jubilee because both the 50-year cycle and the 49-year cycle add up to that same year. And you're saying, how could that be? Well, you'll see probably next time, okay? And you'll understand why he has to come back in the year of Jubilee, all right?